Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us. The session today is how we turned the festival industry green, which actually had nothing to do with me because I'm not in the festival industry. My name is Robert Dunsmore. I'm a freelance creative director, lecturer, and writer. And we're just going to have a conversation. I'm going to introduce Claire to you, and we're going to have a conversation about how she worked to help turn the festival industry green. And then we're going to compare that to the corporate planner to see if we can get a few quick takeaways, and then we'll go a little bit deeper in the second half of the talk. But first, I'd like to introduce Claire. I know her from A Greener Future, a Greener Festival, and she chairs various workshops and bodies, and she's been integral in getting the festival industry to green itself over the past, 10, 16 years maybe?
16 roughly, yeah.
So let everyone know why you're here, and then we're going to go digging straight in.
Thank you. Well, firstly, a disclaimer that the work isn't completely done and not all festivals are completely green. So the work continues as we go. But 16 years ago, I started an organisation called A Greener Festival. And that's because I saw in the, I suppose, underground world that there were a lot of amazing things happening, such as solar-powered sound systems, composting, recycling, and also just a care for the place that we were in. And then I went to do work experience on major corporate festivals and found the opposite to be true. And so I thought, well, how can you take something that's perhaps a bit of a hippie sideline ideal into the corporate events world, essentially, or partway into the corporate events world, which is the festival corporate events. And so we started to look at what do audiences think and began A Greener Festival from that point. In the meantime, I've also done work as the general manager of the Association of Independent Festivals for 6 years. So in that respect, we worked on all sorts of elements of events, from security, crowd management, safety, and so on. And I became an aerial circus performer as well, just on the side. So I've been seeing the events from the performer's perspective as well. Which
quite a high viewpoint.
Yeah. My highest gig so far has been 80 meters high on top of the ArcelorMittal orbit, which was very exciting. Looking down on my previous highest event, which was the Olympic 2012 ceremony, which was only a little 50 meters. So that looked like a baby in comparison. So a varied experience of events over the last 16 years, very much motivated by the purpose of ultimate sustainability and ultimate fun. That's the objective.
So what we're going to do is COP26 was about 16 days ago. It finished, and the event industry were there, and they were actually pretty good. They put up a good show, and they said, lots of things that they were already doing, as well as pledging where they're going to go. With Claire and her festival industry, they've been doing it for 16 years. So what I thought I'd do is I looked through all of the COP promises, all the things that they're doing already, and I'm going to give them to Claire. She hasn't got a clue what's coming. And it's going to be so good or so bad. So what I want is her opinion, professional opinion on it. So here goes. Actions speak louder than words. So COP26, is net zero enough? Sorry, the big one, but...
Net zero is nice and definitely necessary, but it's not the be-all and end-all.
Is it progress or is it life support?
Life support.
Yeah, that's the way I kind of saw it. Now, a lot of the venues that were there presented plans that they already had, and a lot of them were talking about switching or had already switched to renewable energy between 70 and 80%. So good, so bad?
I'd say so good-ish, because the venues, a big part of a venue's impact is their energy, and therefore switching to LED is a great positive. If the culture has changed along with it, then all the better. But I'd say for venues, a switch to LED is
the ones that have done it so far are showing a 31% decrease in their emissions.
That is a good start.
That's quite a big one.
I'd ask, what is it powered by?
Well, the Javits Centre that actually gave us that figure, they're actually having their own solar park built at the moment, and they've also got wind turbines on their roof.
That's a good move.
So, it can be done. So that's so good. Self-generating energy, talking about controlling it. So good, so bad.
So good, definitely. You mean as in generating capacity within your venue or event. Definitely good. Because what we've got at the moment is a lot of people committing to net zero or to renewable energy. But in the UK, for example, we sell REGOs, which means you're just kind of swapping the current capacity of energy and you only stay at the same amount of renewables and you still need the same amount of fossil fuels. It just depends who pays for the ticket for the renewables. Whereas if you're generating yourself, then you're increasing the percentage of renewables that we've all got access to. And that can also be a way of getting access to the grid without it costing you money. Because at the end of the day, energy, electricity, is money. So if you're making energy, it's like you're making money. It's a very wise thing to do.
Okay. Water saving.
Absolutely crucial. And this is something that with net zero and CO2 and looking at things very much from a carbon perspective, the water can often get forgotten because when you translate that into carbon emissions, it doesn't come up on your carbon balance sheet very high. The same with wastewater as well. And yet that is a fundamental element of life.
And a lot of the venues that are being built now, and some existing venues, have got grey water systems, so they're actually taking water once a year, and they're using it for heating.
This I'd say is good.
That's a really, really good one. If any of you think these are good or bad, feel free to give us a wave.
Feel free to disagree as well.
Yeah, feel free to disagree. And there's also Slido, so you can join the thing there, pump in questions and tell us that you disagree or otherwise. This came up an awful lot. All the venues were going, we're swapping to LED light bulbs. So good, so bad.
It's okay. It's better than nothing. Let's not let perfect be the enemy of... No, let's not good be the enemy of perfect. Is that right? No, perfect the enemy of good. This is what we want to do. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Okay.
Got there in the end.
Efficient management system. So in other words, upgrading infrastructure so that you can have dashboards and you know where you're using everything and have less wastage.
I think that that's good because we love to see what's going on. And when you can actually see, like if, for instance, you take one action and you can see a dial go into the red, then you're much more likely to go, hang on a minute, this isn't working, for example.
And you can not repeat that mistake again. The venues at COP that posted the figures for these showed that where they invested in infrastructure, that actually saved them far more than LED light bulbs. So that's a really, really good one.
I've got an example of that actually at Primavera Festival in Barcelona. They were monitoring the energy that was both on the grid and on their generators. They used to have a hybrid between the two. And they could see at one point the kilowatt hours in one area in particular went through the roof. They were like, well, what's going on there? And so they went to see, well, what's going on? And it was some kind of broken heating system in the catering area, so they could go and deal with that. But if they didn't have that telemetry, they wouldn't have known.
Yeah, massive savings. So that's really important. There's a lot of wastage in exhibition halls around here. Some venues are doing materials rescues where they're coordinating with the community, and then they're using reusable things in there that can go into the community, and the community can use the timber and so forth or whatever. So good, so bad.
So good, so long as it's also reusable on the way in as well. So looking at the full circular process, we tend to produce an awful lot of new stuff, and it's just a cultural kind of hangover, I think, that we think everything has to be shiny and brand new, and it's not the case. So we could actually reduce how much waste we're producing by not getting new things all the time. I think that the events industry has got more of an issue with waste than the global picture, because the global picture, 80% of all of our impacts are energy, transport and food. So they're really the ones that we need to be focusing on, energy, transport and food. But we are particularly wasteful as an industry, and therefore we also need to focus on waste.
And that's a culture that we've got to look at.
Yeah.
Food rescue.
Is very good. I mean, obviously, again, trying to not waste the food in the first place by your planning in advance. If you're trying to save money for your organization, then it makes sense to not waste the food anyway. But now there's so many food salvage operations that there's really no reason that good food should be going to waste. And equally, in most countries, there are systems where you can compost and harness the nutrients from any of the food that is going into the waste system.
And designing a menu accordingly.
Exactly. And then being honest with your caterers as well about how many people you expect, what the footfall is, and not just going for cheap, large numbers, and instead really thinking and planning in advance. I've got a good example on food, but maybe that can be for later.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to rattle through a few so that we can go a little bit deeper in the second half. With that wastage and building an exhibition or for a conference, there is a huge, huge production line behind that, and the supply line goes down there. EV points for trucks, so good, so bad.
For trucks, well, at the moment you can't really get EV trucks.
It's starting in America.
Okay.
Asia's doing it as well. China, you can do it.
I think if we have more EV trucks, then that solved so many of our problems that the EV charging it's essential. At the moment, the majority of heavy goods vehicles are more leaning towards hydrogen just because of the weight.
Yeah.
But it's very good to know that they are out there in the US.
That's also further away, so we don't have the hydrogen technology for that.
But it is a bit of chicken and egg there. So with the electric vehicle charging, for example, in the UK, they created the electric highway for charging vehicles way before there were really any electric vehicles on the road. So someone has to be the leader, take the punt, take the risk, and do it when it's not actually looking like it's a necessity.
Yeah, but that's why it's leading in Asia and in North America, because they're actually investing far more because they've got ample investment, whereas we've had less so far, which is why it's been like that. Okay, rattling through a few more. But keeping with that supply chain, ban single-use consumables.
I think that's a given.
Okay, that's so good.
It shouldn't even be a question.
Ban single-use stands.
Yep, absolutely. What's the point?
At COP, one organizer said they were doing that.
Yeah.
So it's starting. Okay, again down that supply chain. ISO 14001, ISO 2012-1, long supply chain. Are they worth it? So good, so bad?
They're a management system. So you could do bugger all and still have a nice shiny management system that goes around it. However, if you've got a big corporation that you really need to have a precise management system to make sure that what you're trying to do in action is happening, then it's beneficial, but it's not the end game. It's only the management system. So you need to do all of your action along with it.
Okay, next one, so good, so bad. B Corp certification.
Ooh, I do like B Corp because it goes much deeper into the holistic idea of sustainability. It actually looks at the structure of your organization. That's something that I'm quite passionate about.
Yeah, and can I also say with unlike the ISOs, with B Corp, you can do it as an individual trader. It's really, really good, and they're so exacting. I think it's excellent. This came up a lot at COP26. Slogans. So good, so bad.
I've never been into slogans myself.
So yeah, we'll stick with actions, speaking louder than words.
I mean, it does help to get groups of people together. It's almost like a calling light that can then bring a group together. Yeah, and then from that you need to take action. But sometimes it feels like people just use the slogan or sign up to the declaration and then go, we're in there, that's fine. We can put a logo on something and not do anything.
Here's a tough one, so good, so bad. Business flying. How many people here flew? How many people came on the train?
That's pretty good.
Better than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your opinion on business flying? What do we do?
Well, I think business flying, there's a lot less need for it than other forms of flying because of the fact that we can meet digitally in many cases. I think that because this especially those exhibiting here, are so dependent upon and pushing for travel, there's a huge responsibility here to make sure that all of our investments and actions are moving towards the most sustainable forms of aviation that we can invest in, and not just wait for that to happen with the other industry. Because if we're driving more aviation, then we have to be part of actually solving the problems in that industry.
So again, that comes down to ample finance and ample resources to make it happen quickly.
Exactly, and absolute transparency as well, to say, look, we're creating these emissions, these are the reasons why, and this is what we're doing about it to try and change it. There's sustainable aviation fuel, there are electric flights due to come like within the next 10 years, but for smaller transport, but it's not here yet, and I think that there could be those who really stand out and make very bold statements that until it's ready, they're going to do everything that they can to lead things in that way or find alternatives.
And the final final COP roulette is carbon offsetting. So good, so bad.
I think offsetting is misleading, and at the moment we've already emitted too much, which means that even if we stop emitting everything now, we've already done too much because it's cumulative, it keeps on growing. Therefore, in order to actually get to the position that we need to be, we need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. What a lot of offsetting does is avoids it happening later. So if you imagine that we're here now, and then you emit this much from your conference and you prevent it from happening somewhere else, you've still got this much more carbon in the atmosphere. So what you need to be doing instead, if you're going to invest in dealing with your emissions, is removing them. And then you end up at least back at zero. The carbon removals is something that's quite new as a market, and you have to be very careful because 10, 15 years ago, it was a wild west on offsets as well. But there are systems and technologies that do permanent removal of carbon from the atmosphere as a last resort, and it's more expensive normally than what you would pay per ton for offsets, and normally you get what you pay for. So if someone's offering you cheap offsets, it's probably not really
So we'll call that a last resort.
It's absolutely, yeah. It's cleaning up.
Going back to, thank you for analysing COP for us. But going back to green festivals. So you started this 16 years ago. And what made you start it? Alistair's trend report this morning talked about a new frontier. What was the frontier that made you start that, and where are you now?
Well, like I touched upon earlier, I saw a great gaping disparity between what I saw as being a good way to be and to live, and what was happening with the masses, I guess, because I was seeing very much kind of counterculture. And then the mainstream culture was perpetuating really poor food, lots of waste, diesel generators, no kind of care for well-being even and for people. And so I thought, well, this transition needs to happen, and it's not going to happen just by kind of campaigning. You need to do it in business as well. I think in the past, the sustainability issue was kind of either a hippie thing or a scientist's thing. And I think business has just caught up now.
Yeah, it was a conscience
business
thing.
and society.
And now it's serious.
Yeah. But now what's happened over the last 15 or so years is it's really grown up that we started by trying to raise awareness and to get people involved. Now, the awareness is very much there, but we saw that there were barriers or ceilings, even within the festivals, that we could go so far and then you'd hit a brick wall or some kind of obstacle. So we saw one of these was with the artists and artists' areas in the festivals. People would have their festival sustainability policy, and then you'd get to the dressing rooms, it'd be like, no, that's a no-go area. You just have to do what the artists say, especially the headliners. And then we were speaking with the agents and the artists, and they were saying, oh, well, you know, we go on tour, but then what we get at the festivals isn't meeting what we want to achieve with our sustainability. Same with the venues. So with the agents, we said, okay, let's make a green rider. We'll put it out not from AGF, but we'll put it out from the agent. Because in the industry, a lot of people in the industry tend to look at the agents as if they hold the keys to everything. And so we got the agents to release the Green Artist Rider, which was like putting the cat amongst the pigeons, which was fantastic. And then the venues came on board.
Such a cool idea.
So the venues then came in and said, okay, now we're receiving all these green artist riders from the artists, but it doesn't necessarily match with what we need to achieve. Here's what we're doing. And so it started the whole conversation that everybody realized, rather than sitting there and going, oh, we can't do anything because they've got the control, and we can't do anything until they've done something, and they have to pay for it. No, they have to pay for it. It meant everyone had to sit around together and go, okay, wait a minute, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and we've all got a shared responsibility. So this is where things have come to now, that we work with the arenas, the tours, the festivals, the promoters.
So, again, like the Green Rider, getting together in a working group and coming up with a solution. Some examples of festivals that are working really well.
So we've got, to go back to that food example actually, Digital Festival, DGTL, in the Netherlands, they have a circular food court, which means that they get all of their food from would-be waste areas. So they'd go, for instance, to supermarkets or charities that collect waste food, And then instead of having caterers, they have a food lineup of chefs, and they receive whatever those ingredients are, and they have to make the menus off the cuff. It's 100% plant-based, which is also important because despite the food miles, the agriculture of meat and dairy is having such a significant impact. If you're doing an event, you might as well go plant-based. It's a quick win. And doesn't cost you anything extra. So they had the circular food court that then also used only biodegradable cutlery and serveware, which they checked could actually go and be composted with the food locally. Because often what happens is you use the biodegradables and they can't be composted, so it ends up going to incinerator. So they did the due diligence on that. They had the information for everybody to see what was happening. And then the compost was taken back to local agricultural land in order to grow food that could then be used for the whole cycle
So
again.
a proper circular economy approach.
Yeah, exactly.
Very unusual.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And then we've had, actually to give a tour example, which didn't connect yet to festivals but will do, we just worked on a 7-day arena tour in the UK with a band where it had 10 trucks, which was more trucks than we'd wanted, but we got rid of a few at least. And then because we had those trucks, we had the option to switch to hydrotreated vegetable oil, HVO, which meant that we were able to save 23 tons of CO2 off the bat on the tour. It cost £1,500 more pounds, or £2,000 more pounds, but what we'd done in advance is put onto the budget of the tour the carbon removals. And that wasn't as a goal. The intention is to reduce that budget of carbon removals. So if you put, say, £200 a tonne into your budget from the get-go, then you've got a chunk of money in your budget that you can chip away at for mitigation. So we prevented 23 tonnes of CO2. It meant because we'd got that line of removals, we actually saved £2,000 rather than spending £2,000. So it's making the money work for you. It's making the financials work for the end game rather than just ignoring the real costs.
And we can do this on the corporate side as well. I did a stand for a construction show recently, and rather than using a large transport vehicle, everything was done with like camping designs, and it was done with fabrics, and the whole thing went into a transit or a Mercedes Sprint van. You can do it so easily.
Absolutely.
So when you're introducing a new idea, like whether it be transport or the Green Rider or the food, how do you get artists and venues and agents, how do you get the whole group working together?
It's not easy, but the key is to listen to everybody as well, to not just go in and say, oh, we have all the answers or this is how you need to do it now, because actually, although like we as AGF have got expertise in sustainability and obviously across different areas of the events industry, but every single sector, individual person that you come to has got their own breadth of experience and expertise. And you really need that, and you need that understanding in order to be able to shape what the sustainable future is going to look like. So if you go in just telling people how it's going to be, it's not going to work. And that's from the CEOs to the crew. You need to listen to everybody's element and make them feel a part of it so that you can get a full picture. And that comes back as well to that holistic approach, because we can try to fix our climate crisis or environmental problems by going from a very intellectual perspective and not valuing perhaps the more creative or heartfelt elements of ourselves, which is how our society has got into this problem in the first place. Ask any Indigenous community and they will show you how to live properly. But also from who is making the decisions, who is creating the roadmap, who is saying what the future is going to look like. And is that all just coming from the same frame of reference? Is it coming from the same few people that have been leading us for so long?
So do you get everybody? What's the process? Do you get everybody in a room, or do you pick them off individually and get them to buy in?
It really varies.
How does that roadmap go to them?
I think that it goes in both ways. So first, there'll be those that are really engaged that you get together with, perhaps as one sector, that then decide, okay, what is it that we want to do? And then you would connect with, let's say if you were the tour production group, which is one group that we work with, you speak as a community and then bring in the agents to speak to that community and then bring in the promoters to speak to that community.
But did you do that as working groups, or was it done ad hoc per project?
It's both. So the working groups worked really well during the pandemic because everyone had time to get together. What we've found is that following the working groups and those larger group meetings or industry-led projects, you can get so far into a declaration and to commitments, but then you need to have smaller working groups to actually make things happen.
Yeah, otherwise the pledge just becomes a slogan,
Exactly,
whatever.
yeah.
Which is, if anyone was in the last session before this, which was on young talent and diversity and inclusion, that's very much what David was saying. He was saying about connecting senior and junior, connecting people, and so you've got different perspectives of the same thing and different experiences of the same thing. When everyone's got a voice, they kind of join in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it creates that full ecosystem as well, because otherwise you're always going to be missing a part of a puzzle. And if you come in with a sustainability strategy or an initiative and you haven't taken into account the different players who are a part of that, then it's likely to be met with resistance or not work.
So would you call that actually a new culture of innovation rather than, I mean, it's a strategy, but it's also a culture?
Yeah, I'd say so. And it's not taking that top-down approach where, I mean, I'm going to try not to get philosophical here, but in our, I suppose, patriarchal paradigm, we've got a few people at the top that take all of the wealth and all of the power and make all of the decisions, hence why we're in a terrible mess. And then there's those at the bottom who are led or exploited, essentially, and suffer, which is the majority. So if we're
Or freelancer.
Or a freelancer, indeed. So if we're going to actually create a sustainable society and future, then we need to stop working from that power over paradigm and instead look at things as a collective and value not only people's input to the system, but make sure that they're getting the same output.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about the session before, where they were really talking about this culture of inclusion. And I saw the power and the opportunity in that, which I thought was great. And then in the final couple of minutes, to leave these guys with, you said right at the beginning, we're not perfect yet, it's progress, what are we missing, what's next, what do you want to happen next? What's the next thing you're doing?
I'd say, again, it's that looking at how we change the value and the perception of value and where we place value, because we've actually got a lot more agency than we often realize or take responsibility for, actually. And so if we want to, like I said, have a sustainable industry going forwards or a sustainable society, then we need to start making the money work for the people and work for the environment. Because at the moment, what we've created for ourselves is that the environment and people work for money. And that means we're going to end up with a screwed environment, screwed people, and just a whole chunk of money for a few people at the top. So this is the redistribution we need to see. The way we're approaching that is to look at, getting everybody in the system around the table, and then going, okay, where is the money flowing, and who is it working for? What is it leading to? How much is going on fossil fuels? How much is going to a few individuals? And how much is actually shared back into the system? What are the deal structures? So are we saying we have to keep on flying, we have to keep on doing 20 shows in 20 days because that's how we make money? Or are we going to change the deal structures so that actually you can do things differently and still feed yourself and send your kids to uni if that's what you want to do?
That doesn't sound completely, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I'd have said no one's going to buy into that. But there is so much decentralization and so much decentralization of power, whether it be digital or human, going on. I think there's actually a hope for that.
I do too. I think there's no choice, actually. And eventually, if we keep on doing it where people and environment work for money, then the money will end up having no value. The only way that you can have value in the money is if you take into account actually the people and the environment, which at the end of the day is one thing, in case anybody forgot.
Yeah, and that's brought together, the whole Accelerate stage started off with the trend report this morning, and a couple of the themes in there, they keep coming out again. The human, the people, and the decentralization. Very important.
Absolutely.
Claire O'Neill, thank you very much indeed.
It's my pleasure.
And thank you all.